Hey guys! So in this video we are going to talk a little bit about committing code and trying to be a little bit of a responsible committer to a project. Now I'm gonna admit to you that I am absolutely horrible at this. And I mean horrible, like for real. I have to force myself to do this in a proper manner. So this is once again one of those videos, do what I say, not what I do. Let's get into it. So to give you a bit of a story, when I was it's happened so many times, but I remember this one specific scenario which was absolutely horrible back at my old job, Ticketmaster. We were basically working on a section of the checkout page where, well, I'm not going to get into too many details, but we were working on a fairly big feature with a lot of complexity, and I had been working for quite a few days on the problem. We committed the code, we pushed it, it was all working, and then there was a slight issue that I had to fix basically a few days afterwards. And so I went in, did the fix, and it was such a trivial thing. It was like less than 5 minutes. I just kind of did it, and because I was so sure that there's no problem here, I just pushed it, and I was done. A little while later, it was released, and it came back in the form of what was at the time called a P1. And for those of you who don't use Jira or the P system or the priority system, a P1 is the most critical thing that you can possibly imagine. It's DEFCON 1. I don't know what DEFCON, like the DEFCON system, but like it's the highest level of critical issue to fix, which in that company meant basically fix it today. And it was a bug. And it was actually a bug that was, believe it or not, related to CSS. I had forgotten to fix a slight issue, or rather I had by mistake removed a class name when I was messing around with the code. And that single class name broke the I'm not a robot module basically. So, and that's like, if you haven't seen it, it's Google's basically it's the reCAPTCHA that Google has provided us so graciously, that it identifies bots versus real people, or it attempts to do that anyway. And that's a hard requirement for you to be able to buy a ticket. So with that bug, nobody could really buy a ticket. Not so fun. And then I went back and I saw that my mistake was that because the problem was so trivial, I didn't really think about it. I didn't really care enough to check my diff. I didn't make sure to go into my code and like actually verify that the thing was working and just do a sanity check to make sure that I didn't create any regression, because I was lazy. The problem was so small that what could happen, right? And see, that's the thing with CSS, especially if you're working in CSS. If you're not checking your diff and if you're not regression testing the change you made, you're putting yourself at risk. Most people would say that they don't think that CSS can cause all that much harm, but trust me, CSS can cause a lot of harm. It can hide an element, it can make something disappear on the page, it can do a lot of stuff, and unfortunately we can't really design good tests for it. I remember this one time we were actually saved by an acceptance test, and this is why I keep telling people that acceptance tests are really important. I'm actually working on a video that will kind of show you how to do this, so that if you want to, you can. But basically we had another very similar issue. Here's Frederick again, not checking his diff, not making sure that he didn't, by mistake remove a class name, and I did. And luckily enough, my colleagues had written an acceptance test that was smart enough to figure out that basically a tooltip that was supposed to be displayed in order for the user to be able to agree to the license agreement or the agreements and so forth. That tooltip had been positioned outside of the screen. There was no way for the user, like you can click it and appear from the user's perspective, it looked like the application was broken, nothing happened right. But the acceptance test figured that out. The acceptance test, which is an automated test that just goes through the flow and checks that all the things are in place, was actually designed in such a way that it saw that, hey, that tooltip is not visible to the user. You should probably figure that out. So the lessons to be learned from my mistakes here is to do 3 things. Make sure that regardless of the size of the problem, you check the diff, like check the changes to make sure, like, and for all the files. That's why I urge you to make small commits, because it gets less tedious to work through all those files if there's just a few of them. If there's a lot of them, you're gonna stop paying attention, just skim. But it is important that you check every line so that you didn't, like, by mistake change the class name, or like there's a typo or something like that. So make sure that you do that. Second thing is, make sure that when you push the code, you run the application, you go through just once to the place where you actually touch the code and just click around a little bit. Make sure that it didn't, like, break something important. And thirdly, this is an optional one. If your company has the money or the culture or the resources, call it what you want, to do proper BDD or behavioral driven development, use that. It's a very powerful tool. It's probably my absolute favorite thing about working when I was working at Ticketmaster. You can say a lot about that company, but they did BDD well, like really well. And trust me, when a system is that complicated, I can only thank my lucky star that I had such amazing colleagues who had the foresight to realize the value of behavioral driven development. That's my tip to you.